All right. Well, this is episode 21 of Talk That Talk. I'm your host, Fallon Stokes, and we have a special guest today. We have Senior Women's Administrator at Auburn University, Monique Holland. Welcome to the show, Monique.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so happy to have you. And, just going to give a little bit of background about your journey. So when I met you, I was a pipsqueak at Georgia Tech playing basketball, and you were one of my assistant coaches there. And I didn't have you my entire time there, but you were there for, what was it, about 5 or 6 years before I got there? Okay.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there. Okay. And you were coaching under Agnes Baronato at the time. So she gave you your first opportunity as an assistant coach. You were young in your 20s, and you don't see that too often for Black women. And then you made the decision transition, wanted to get into administration, and then you switched over to the compliance division at Georgia Tech, where you kind of got your start in administration and was working with Mary McElroy. I call her Miss Mary. And doing some great work to keep us in line at Georgia Tech, make sure we were doing the right things. And, I think just to have 2 Black women working in that department was very helpful. At the time, we may not have known it, but
Right.
guys were looking out for our best interests. And then you went on, had a few journeys where you were at Georgia State, you were at Clayton State for a period of time. And then you get your first athletic director position at your alma mater, Alabama State. And then transitioned to SMU as an executive senior women's administrator there. And then now you're at Auburn University. So very impressive to see your journey as a Black woman, especially working in 2 different realms at HBCU compared to being at a Power 5 or a couple of Power 5 schools. So I just want to talk to you and just start out and just learning about your journey. You grew up in Missouri, right?
I did. The youngest of 4 girls, raised by a single mother. Yeah,
Okay.
but the product of a village, for sure.
I got you. Yeah, it always is. So your collegiate career, you went to Alabama State and you hooped for the Hornets, the Lady Hornets. So talk
Yeah.
about that experience, and when did you decide that you wanted to work in college athletics?
Interesting, Fallon. I was a student athlete all my life. I started playing sports when I was in the 2nd grade, and had some amazing. My sister, my second oldest sister, was my first coach, and I later learned that sports was going to be my ticket out. I didn't grow up with a lot of money around. There wasn't a lot of examples of people going to college, or at least leaving my town. And so I learned just through the village of how much sports can impact the rest of my life. And so that's kind of what happened. So then even when I got to college, I played for a male coach and I went to an HBCU, but even still then I did not think about working in sports. I just didn't see women. And so there's so much to be said about having examples to give you an idea or some options to consider to work in sports. And so it wasn't until after college, I had a great time at Alabama State, great mentors, great coaches. Like I said, still had no desire to work in sports as much as I loved it. I had a passion with working with people, so I was going to go into a therapeutic industry.
Mhm.
But when I went to Atlanta after college, I worked for the '96 Olympics, so I'm dating myself a little bit, but worked there. And that's when after the Olympics was over, I went to Georgia Tech to look for a job, not
Okay.
sports. And I went over to the athletics complex. First, when the HR department was just applying for receptionist opportunities and those type of things, but went to the athletics department and went to the women's basketball office and sat there in the lobby. And I heard Agnes, and Agnes, a little loud. I heard her voice, not knowing who she was.
Yeah, you can't miss her.
Right. Her amazing personality, you can hear it a mile away. I went and saw, and I was sitting in the lobby, kind of waiting for her to come outside. She had no idea I was there. I'm shy, thinking, not really believing I belonged there, right? So I'm just so thankful. And this goes back to just my journey, even up to that point where people just instilled in me, it's okay to just go for it. And I really didn't know that was in me until later in life when I started to reflect back on some of the decisions I've made. But I saw Bobby Crimmins. You remember Bobby Crimmins?
Oh yeah,
Bobby. Yes. if you know, legend, a legend in his own right. I mean, he is a legend.
Mhm.
And I saw his name on the nameplate outside of the offices, and that's when I really thought I didn't belong because I knew Bobby Crimmins. But
Mhm.
and so I was getting ready to leave actually, and Agnes came out and was like, "Hey, what do you want?" You know Agnes, and I said, "I just came over to volunteer." And she said, and at that time the team was getting prepared to go to Italy or Europe,
Uh-huh.
and she said, well, why don't you just come, come to practice, And I did that. And she invited me down to speak just to say hello to the ladies. They
Uh-huh.
went to Europe. I sent her a thank you note. Thank you note for letting me, sit in on practice. I sent her a congratulations on their victory in Europe. And soon after that, she's like, hey, I got an opportunity here. Do you want it?
Ah.
Unbeknownst to me, she said two things that are very important to her are saying thank you and offering your service. And
Mhm.
this is big in service. And so
Mhm.
that's how I landed my first opportunity. So I had no, to be very honest, it was in a sport I loved, so it was easy for me to
Mhm.
transition to that. But definitely a blessing. A girl from St. Joe went from graduated from an HBCU to work for my first opportunity to be at a Power Five institution like Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
It's still a blessing for
No,
me.
that's awesome. And that's just Coach B's personality. I think that's
Mhm.
one thing she always taught us. Even like when she had so many different people from like the Mayfields. I mean, we would have like big names coming
Yes.
in our locker rooms to come speak to us. And I don't think we knew how major it was back then. And we were just like, we wanted some ice cream from the Mayfield. But
Yes.
those connections, the importance of writing a thank you note to somebody you meet, staying in touch,
Mhm.
networking, that's one of the things that I look back on that she taught us. And we didn't know it at the time, but it was just so important in life, those life
Mhm.
experiences, right?
Right.
So, okay, you get to Georgia Tech and then you're there, you're coaching. I know my freshman year, we made it to the NIT, WNIT. And then it was in 2001, 2002, you moved to compliance, I believe. So,
Mhm.
what was the reasoning behind that? Why did you think you wanted to take a shift or make a shift from coaching into
Mhm.
going into administration?
Well, I was able, one, Mary McElroy was such an inspiration. And
Hmm.
so I've been fortunate to have Black women in roles before it was popular, right?
Hmm.
So, but it allowed me to marry my passion for integrity, for education and sport. I
Hmm.
always wanted to be a teacher. It's always
Hmm.
been about integrity, and I love sports. So it was an opportunity to marry the three of those things together. And
Right.
so I shared my goal with Mary McElroy. And so when she was promoted to the senior level position, and then Jennifer Conderas was there as well, they both afforded me that opportunity to transition into compliance. So that's how I was able to get started in administration. So I always tell people, just share your goals with people.
I know, right? You never
Mhm.
know what may happen when you do it. So
Right.
after you're in compliance, you're at Georgia Tech in the compliance department for maybe what, 2, 3 years? I'm
Yeah.
trying to, okay.
Mhm.
So what was your next move after that? Was it Clayton State after
Yes.
that? Okay.
Right. And it's Clayton State because, and again, just I always go back, like people thought I was crazy, right? To
Uh-huh.
leave Georgia Tech, this major institution, to go to a Division II school down the street.
Mhm.
But I was just telling a young person that yesterday why I believe in the Division II model. For me, it was about I would get more opportunities at a place like Georgia Tech. It's almost like a glass ceiling. People just weren't going to leave. It was such an amazing institution, amazing place to work. So people weren't going to leave. And I knew going to Division II to work with Mason Barfield, I would get afforded the opportunity to do a lot of things. And I did. I oversaw cheerleading, I oversaw marketing, I oversaw game day management, like I oversaw it all. So, I didn't know all about it, but when I spoke with Mason about the opportunity, I was pretty intrigued by the opportunities to do more things at a Georgia Tech where there's more resources. You're pretty much siloed in your role, and so
Right.
this just allowed me to expand in athletics to go when I went to Clayton State.
That's a good point because I think a lot of my friends who are in coaching, sometimes you forget that, right? Like you
Mhm.
want to get to the big school and you just see the big picture, but
Mhm.
not understanding the steps you may have to take to get to that Power Five and get into the position that you want to get or achieve in the future. So
Right.
it is important going to those smaller schools and working in every capacity, understanding
Mhm.
every nook and cranny of it. So when you
Mhm.
get that opportunity, you know how it works and what you need to do in that role. So
Right.
After Clayton State, you went to Georgia State next, right? So I think that's
No,
what. No, it wasn't. Okay, yeah, I'm trying to follow
no,
this journey because you've been a lot of places. So
right.
let's
Sounds bad now.
follow it. So after Clayton
I went to
State, what was the next move?
the NCAA national
That's
office.
what it was. Okay,
Right, right.
okay,
And oh my gosh, someone there called me. I was not looking to go to the NCAA. For one, I didn't want to move up north back to the
right.
cold states,
Yeah,
but
Indianapolis.
yes,
Okay,
by a gentleman by the name of Paul Parker. He and I met during a conference, and so he had recommended me to
uh-huh.
two amazing Black women, Wendy Walters and Delise O'Malley, who
Okay,
are Wendy's still there, but Delise is doing amazing things down in Florida. Don't want to get the organization she works with wrong, but everyone knows Delise. But I remember the interview process, and the one thing they asked me, which was so crazy, they said, "What would keep you from taking the job?" And I said, "The cold weather." I always tell people that story because the first place they sent me when I got there was to New Hampshire in December. So I felt like I was being initiated, but okay. But anyways, I went there again. I've been afforded to work with some amazing women, Black women.
uh-huh.
But I went there because again, it's the NCAA national office.
Yeah,
I always ask Mary McElroy about, what I should be doing. I'm so young in my career, and this is before Twitter and D1 ticker and all those things. So, you didn't get caught up in where you should be or where other people thought you should be. I just kind of went with what made sense
hmm
for me. And the crazy part is, Fallon, I didn't have an end goal at that point. I didn't have like, I want to be an athletics director. I just wanted to keep getting opportunities. And so, and honestly, back then, not many Black women were thinking about being athletics directors because you just didn't see many examples or
right.
any person of color, period. And so, but that's what I went to the NCAA there for about 10 months, and then Mary got the opportunity at Georgia State and invited back to her on her staff at Georgia State.
Got you. So,
Mhm.
what is just some of the things you learned at the NCAA offices or just in that position, even though it was for 10 months? What are
Mhm.
some of the things you learned and just how they govern, I guess their involvement in athletics and
Mhm.
policing? What are some of the things you learned?
Well, what I did learn, I think the most important thing that I learned, and which made it very difficult for me to leave, which was one of the reasons that made it difficult for me to want to leave or to leave,
Mhm.
is that it is important to have diverse representation. I remember sitting in during a waivers committee meeting, right? And we were
Okay.
hearing waivers for initial eligibility or maybe continuing eligibility, one of them. And some of the rationale that was provided, I could relate to. And some people that did come up from a similar background could not. So, for example, it may be, a young person is failing because they had to go home every weekend to help grandmother raise their little sister who's pregnant at 15 and brother who's maybe 10 on drugs, right? Those are real stories.
Mm,
And so if you are not familiar with those type of those type of cultures or even can't even imagine it, then
right.
you're less likely to believe the story, if you will. And so I think it was so important to have not just diversity in what we look like, but our backgrounds in
Mm,
those rooms. And so even at that time, I was one of the only few that looked like me, or at least from that background in the
mm,
room. So I felt like my voice was important. Even though I was young, I just knew me speaking up during some of those conversations was important. And I was afraid that might be lost if I
mhm,
left.
mhm.
And I'm not sure why I carried that weight, but that's just who I am. So I
Right.
just remember that being a lesson learned that it's so that's probably when I realized how important it is to have diverse representation and not just from race and gender, but from backgrounds. So
Mm,
that's probably the most important thing I learned working there. A lot of people there have a law background, and no offense to you, just very proud of you and your journey. But that's probably one thing. The other thing was just the which is why I think I was an attractive candidate to the NCAA is the ability to multitask.
mhm.
We had to do a lot of. You just wasn't. Even though it was all compliance related and interpretation related, you had to serve on various committees, work with different personalities at different degrees
Right.
in their experience. So I learned a lot about that. So
Okay. That's
yeah.
awesome.
Mhm.
And that's true. I think in so many different arenas, like just having true representation and diverse representation in my profession as a criminal
Mhm.
defense attorney is, I can't relate to half my clients' situations, but sometimes just knowing a story, a friend, a relative in similar circumstances, you can understand it and you're
Mhm.
able to, I guess, articulate that to other
Right.
people who don't. So after your experience with the NCAA, you go to Georgia State, right?
Right.
And I thought that was so dope when Miss Mary got that job. I was like, it's a black female at Georgia State. That's the athletics director. That's
Right.
awesome,
Right.
And I know, people she worked closely with, she trusted, and she built these relationships with you. I think Marvin Lewis was there at a point as well. So these are people from Georgia Tech she brought over,
Right.
run this programs.
Mhm.
Sports programs over there. So talk about that experience, because I just remember the biggest thing was she started football or incorporated the football program, which they didn't have, and it's a big moneymaker for them now.
Right.
So talk about that experience.
Yeah, I left right at the beginning phases of her working on that project, and she definitely deserves the credit for football coming to Georgia State. It was a part of her vision immediately.
That's the money maker. I hate to say it, but it is.
She understood. It was a great hire. I think what people failed to realize Mary was one of the pioneers of Black women in those positions, and unfortunately sometimes I think people overlook the challenges because we're all learning, right, how to navigate that space, and she was as well. But I was very fortunate for her to think highly enough of me to bring me back on her executive staff. And the first position I had similar to that was at Clayton State, and it was just much different. So, but I'm just glad she was able to recognize the skill sets that I had that can add value to her program. I was overseeing compliance, but she also had me overseeing facilities, which I had no idea, but I hired an amazing young lady, Sarah Davis, a woman. Mary was about empowering women, and so I'll always be grateful to her for that. So I did that, and I oversaw sports like baseball, which I'd never had before, and soccer. Now I don't celebrate that because those sports are long days.
Yeah.
but I've always appreciated getting an opportunity to work with sports I'd never worked with before.
Okay.
But what Mary taught me, oh my gosh, Mary McElroy, she's very, oh my gosh, I remember sometimes she'd have me walk through, because I'm over facilities, right? So not just projects, but also facilities themselves. She'd have me walk through the facilities and make sure like there's no cobwebs in the corners, and this, and like she would do the eye test. So me and Sarah would have to go through buildings all the time to make sure, but what that taught me is just be very, what's the word? Proud's not the word, but I can't even think of the word, Fallon, but she just made me have pride. There's the word.
Right.
In the space that I need to own it, but have pride where I work. And that means all part of this. And so I didn't look at it initially like that, but as I started leading in other places, I became Mary McElroy. When it came to that stuff, like the details, the details. And so she taught me that. But I was there at Georgia State for about 2.5 years and just had an amazing run there.
And I think that speaks volumes, because Miss Mary does have that Air Force background. So, with that military background, it's going to be like specific, very structured. And she always has been like that since I've known her. So, and I think that's important if you're going to run anything, any type of organization, business. So transitioning after you leave Georgia State, then you get your opportunity at your alma mater, right? As an athletic director.
Well,
no?
Well, actually, I went there not in the AD role, but we can.
Okay. So we'll talk about that experience when you decided or made the decision to go to Alabama State.
Right.
So how did that transition start? What position did you start in, or what role? And then when did you make the transition to AD?
Again, another time when people thought I was crazy to leave Georgia State, getting ready to start football, could put my name on that project as well.
Right.
But my truth is, Fallon, and as crazy as it sounds, my alma mater needed something that I had, a skill. They needed someone with a strong compliance background. And at that time, I didn't have a lot of money to give them, but I could at least give them this. And I looked at it like I had a great experience up to that point I didn't look at it as a watering down my career. I looked at it as it's about my character. It's about my commitment to my alma mater, my loyalty to to them. And, so to me, it was a no-brainer. The people that knew thought I was crazy, but it was a no-brainer for me. I got to give something back to my school. And when I got there, I brought April Taylor, one of my former student athletes, right, with me. She was my student athlete at Clayton State, so not too far before, long before that I met April and brought her with me, and hired another young African American female to join me, and we just tackled the compliance background, compliance issues they had. They were going through a major infractions case, and again I had the skill set they were looking for. And it wasn't easy at the beginning because, again, they were going through this major infractions case, and just had to work long hours. But I wouldn't change it for the world. It definitely shaped who I am and now as a leader, in addition to all the things Mary taught me. So about 6 months after I arrived there, they then promoted me to the director of athletics position because of the work that I had done. So we gave a lot of hours, but I can't take credit by myself. I had April Taylor and Shay Taylor and Christine Hampton. I had some pretty amazing women who had my back while I was there.
Right. Mm-hmm. So now you're the AD in this role and at an HBCU. And previously on season 1, I had a gentleman by the name of Xavier Peoples who started this app called HBCU Change, and is trying to start raising more funds or donations by anybody or alumni who want to give to these programs, especially with athletics. And I know that's a key concern in just trying to get alumni to either donate to the athletic program or how to raise money for these programs at HBCUs. So talk about some of the challenges you faced, coming from larger schools, whether it was Georgia State, Georgia Tech, and now you're at Alabama State trying to continue to get money, fundraising for your programs, athletics, facilities, compliance, all of these different facets that you had to oversee.
Well, what I was mostly focused on when I got there was truly just the operations of the department as it relates to academics and compliance. Those were having the greatest impact, and a lot of that was negative impact on our student athletes. And so I was totally focused on that. And so we spent a lot of our time doing eligibility waivers. Alabama State was just in a very, I guess, challenging situation, if you will, where just lack of resources or limited resources just kept them from providing the support to our student athletes that I know we should be able to provide with or without resources, right? Well, maybe because I'd had the experience is why I was able to bring in some creative ways to provide some of the things. So I didn't spend a whole lot of my time, to be honest, on the fundraising piece, other than just really being an advocate for our budgets to support our student athletes having a great experience while they were there. And that was just, being an advocate to the campus. And so I have no doubt that I couldn't have raised money there, because I really had, I have a pretty positive image in Alabama State culture in the world. So I know that I could raise money there. But that's what our focus was. It was about really making sure our student athletes could compete. We had a lot of kids who were ineligible when we got there. But again, it was just, some of it was just misadvisement. People just didn't have the background support to really know some of the rules and stuff like that. So my experience with the people that I brought in, we were able to work through that and reverse some of that through. It was very, again, it's hard to explain, but we just put our head down and went to work and figured out what the issues were. And the thing is, a lot of those kids were doing well. People just were not maybe applying the right rules at the time, or the right, the eligibility. And I also brought Dina Freeman Patton down, her and one of her staff members from Georgia State, right? Who they had the academic background. So they really helped me. Dina just got an AD job, so proud of her. But they came down to help me. So we were able to help revive compliance and academics at Alabama State. And that was my focus, because again, that was impacting our kids the most at the time.
Okay. So how long were you at Alabama State? Then you make the transition to SMU, right? So you help clean up all these eligibility issues, compliance issues, academics, and you move on to SMU. So talk about that move and your role while you were at that school.
Right. I wasn't there as long as I would have liked, as far as when I think about my goal when I start to realize being an AD is possible after seeing Mary in that role. I always said I wanted to do that at my alma mater. I didn't expect it to happen that soon. And I always tell people I didn't know what I didn't know. And so about 10 months into I guess I was there a year and a half, almost 2. can't remember exactly when. I just realized it wasn't the right time for me, Fallon, and I had to be okay with that. Um, I had a great time there. I love my alma mater, but I just there was a lot as I started learning more and more and more. I knew I needed more, and no one, Alabama State didn't. I just came up to that realization on my own, and it was hard because, who doesn't want to be the AD at their alma mater at 30
Right.
something years old? But
Right.
I was like, there's just so much more I can give my alma mater at another time, and so I just chose to move on. Mary called me. Mary again was at SMU for a short time, and she wanted to move back to Atlanta to be with her family. And she called me, and you probably remember. I don't know if you remember Steve or Senior or not. You may not have gotten to Georgia Tech at the time, but he was on the leadership team when I was at
Okay.
Georgia Tech, and Mary was there, and he might have gone to Central Florida by then, but he was the AD at SMU at the time, and Mary was like, "Hey, I plan to leave. I plan to resign. Are you interested in this opportunity?" And so,
Mm.
so that's how that happened. I would not have left had she not had made that call, and I had to really think about what I can get from SMU that I can then bring back at some point if I ever chose to, or if Alabama State and I ever came to agreement to return. But I just knew I needed to learn more about this industry, and I
Right.
knew that I can get that even at SMU. So that's why I left, and it was not an easy decision. I loved living in Montgomery. I love making an impact. Me and the staff was doing great things. We were, we weren't focused on winning national championships. We were focusing on being competitive and winning conference championships.
Mm-hmm.
And we were focusing on developing our kids, right? Getting them ready for the real world. And I was working on developing our staff. We had, during staff meetings, we had someone present on professional development. So we're focused on things that could impact the rest of their lives. And it wasn't just always on the field of play.
Right. Right. Okay. So when you get to SMU, talk about um, just some of the things that you faced. I mean, being a Black female again in that role as a senior administrator, and making the transition again, coming from an HBCU, now you're back to a predominantly white school,
Mhm.
that you're having to enforce and make sure that it's parity in the field of sports or in the athletic department. Talk
Right.
about that experience and that transition.
Well, the good thing is, and it's so crazy because when I think about this, I think that up until that point, my experience was pretty good, right? Because
Hmm.
I had Black women leaders, so I didn't really think about the issues that maybe a lot of my friends and counterparts were facing. And again, we didn't have a lot of the social media platforms, so I didn't know a lot of other Black women in the
Right.
industry other than the ones I was working with. So having Mary, having Wendy, having Delise, you know, I already felt like I could handle it, right?
Hmm.
And when I got there, Steve Orsini, he claimed me as his own because I was with him at Georgia Tech. I was a young person, a young administrator then, and I think I was coaching when he was there first, and so before he left. And so I think someone like Steve, who truly was committed to development. I think he was proud that I came from the same. You probably remember Dave Brain, our director of athletics at Georgia Tech.
My fave. Yeah.
Yes. So Dave Brain basically raised Steve, raised Mary, raised me. So we were a family, right? So I
Hmm.
already felt comfortable going into that space
Okay.
with Steve.
Okay.
And some of the things I realized later I didn't know in real time. But because I always try to look back on my career and say, why did I feel okay? Why did I feel comfortable at the time? And then sometimes and later on, I probably didn't feel as comfortable. Um,
Hmm.
and around 2000, well, actually, when I got to Georgia Tech, I think in 2005 when I was at Georgia State is when Facebook was introduced, but that was really just for students at the time. So it started
Hmm.
its way to us adults, right? Um, but yeah, so again, I was overseeing compliance there, felt supported because of Steve Orsini. He was, and there was another person of color, but I was the only female at the time on the leadership team. But I never felt anything different because of his leadership. And at a school like that, SMU was known for the whole Pony Express and the major issues that happened back then. So
Hmm.
compliance was big there. I mean, it was a big issue. Like they were really concerned. Even 20 years later, they were still worried about, are we going to violating rules? And so for them to support me in that role spoke volumes because I knew how important that position was to everyone there at the university, including President Turner.
Wow. We're gonna call you the fixer. I mean, you went to some programs in compliance where you had to really fix some issues.
I have.
And that's a major issue. We see that so much in college athletics, like either with coaches or just programs being penalized for compliance issues, recruiting violations, so much. And I've always talked about, like, you've seen true disparities sometimes in how I would say minority or black coaches or black
Mhm.
ADs are policed in these situations compared to some of their white counterparts. So it's
Mhm.
very interesting that that's a whole dynamic. But I'm gonna call you to fix it because it seems like you fix problems when you don't even do it.
I never really thought about that, but I think it just goes back to just doing what's right,
Yeah,
right? There's no
yeah.
compromising in that space for me.
No, I'm a true believer in that as well.
Mhm.
So now, in your role now as the senior women's administrator at Auburn University, I know you oversee Title IX, and just making sure that it's no disparities in how programs, are used, sports, games, equipment, facilities, whatever the case may be. We know Title IX is something that just deals with the realm of education, and it's talked so much about in sports that people think it's just related to sports, but it's not.
Right.
But talk about what you've been able to do since you joined the staff at Auburn University back in 2018, and how important your role is being in Alabama, at a Power Five school that's really known for football, say basketball, tons of
Mhm.
sports, more sports than I would assume they had at SMU, that we had at Georgia Tech. So
Mhm.
talk about that realm and the sports you oversee, and just really trying to make sure that there's no disparities with Title IX rules and regulations.
Well, if you can find an institution that has no disparities, you let me know where that is. It's definitely a work in progress still. I'll start with this first, Fallon. I knew when I left SMU. I always tell people I had a really good situation at SMU. I had
Mhm.
an amazing athletics director and Steve Rossini first, and then Rick Hart, and I was very comfortable, and I could have stayed there forever.
Right.
So I knew my next stop, if it wasn't in the AD chair again, I had to trust and believe and knew that I can be my authentic self with the next leader I worked with. And
Okay.
I knew that now and green. And he's the reason I went to Auburn. Although I loved living in this part of the region, being at a Power Five was also very attractive, but I would not have left if it wasn't for the leader, because
Mm,
I could address those disparities with him, right? I can be honest about that. And a lot of times when there is those type of things occurring, it usually impacts people who look like me, whether it's a female or a person of color. And so
mhm,
sometimes, for a long time, I didn't have to worry about this, but especially at SMU, it probably became more apparent, I guess, if you will, that I started to question or worry is probably a better word, how people would interpret what my perception of something, right? So
mhm,
because you're questioning, like, do they think I'm saying it because I'm black, because I'm a woman, or is it the truth, right? But
mhm.
we put that on ourselves to think, that worry about what they're going to think.
Right.
And so I
And
just
you
had to.
don't need to.
Right, exactly. But that's just what we carry. And a lot of
Mhm.
my counterparts in this industry, we all have dealt with that. And so, but when I got to Auburn, that was Alan and I had that conversation early on, and we committed to one another to. And although Alan looks like me, he's been in some very different places and came up a little differently in this industry than I did. And so he and I are able to talk about those experiences that maybe he had, that I had, that we didn't share. It wasn't a common experience. So, but anyways, at Auburn, I'm constantly challenging Title IX as far as when we make decisions, and
Mhm.
so it's always a part of the discussion. It's a commitment. Alan and I just had a conversation the other day. I said, Alan, it's really time for us to do a Title IX audit. I appreciate a leader who's not afraid of that, right?
Mhm.
We
Mhm.
need to know what's happening in our department, because there's going to be certain things that we don't even recognize. We
Right.
know some of the ones that are way up here and everyone can see, right? Things that are sometimes hard to do when you got football, especially. But it's those things that truly impacts, because everyone's got a facility, but there's some things that is impacting the experience that we probably don't know, right, until you
Yeah.
do a audit. And so, so yeah, so I it's all about relationships with your leader and their commitment to Title IX when you're not in
Right.
that year. And it's also important for your leader to be comfortable, also echoing those sentiments to people who can make those decisions above him or her.
Uh-huh.
That's always the case. People sometimes don't want to or tend to not understand or want to understand that it doesn't matter where the money comes from. So it doesn't matter that football may raise more money than another sport. That does not matter in the eyes of Office of Civil Rights. And so I have to constantly remind our people, our staff of that, like it does not matter. So we have to be more thoughtful and diligent in our efforts to support all of our sports. And so if you can give them a similar experience, you definitely can at least get a B. But until you do that audit, you're so far away from making receiving a grade of A. Because trust me, there's disparities everywhere.
Right.
But at least I think if you at least make an effort, and I will be honest, Fallon, I don't know if I could work for a leader that wasn't committed to it. It would be very difficult for me to stay there. It really would.
Well, this is another question, just going or piggybacking off of this with Title IX. So I know so many people get confused and think in athletics that it means that everything has to be equal, right? So they think if football has this much money they're getting, then women's basketball needs to get this money, and that's not what it's about.
Right.
But just try and explain a bit the differences between like equal and just parity, just making sure that it's a level playing field. Talk about that a little bit and just the differences between sports and what you try to get for the underrepresented, which are usually the female sports or the male sports that don't bring in a lot of revenue.
Right.
But just how you have to work, especially at Auburn University, when you have so many different sports programs.
Right. Well, it's kind of what I've alluded to earlier. It's not easy, and I think even those institutions that have disparity, I don't think that's their intent. It just is difficult sometimes, and people do often compare to football. And so what we try to do is just provide a similar experience and try to have practices in place that if there is a difference, it's for non-discriminatory reasons, right? So I think one of the things that stands out to me most, especially being in the SEC, is charter flights. And so we're constantly trying to, and it's not a cheap tap,
No.
it's not cheap, right? So we try to look at, like, for football, even though here at Auburn, football drives a lot of places because time you get to a commercial flight, not a commercial part, but a big plane. Sometimes the time to do that is just better just to drive to Florida or whatever. But anyways, when it comes to that, we have to look at, and the reason why we could justify it. Let me go back. I think it might be better to talk about SMU with this because because it was probably, like I said, they probably flew more places than Auburn's football team flies because of the location and proximity to other institutions. But you have to look at the numbers. It's probably better to charter football because of the vast numbers than it would be to charter another sport. And it's so hard people are always saying, well, what sports do you compare to football, right? It really means all the other women's sports, female sports, right?
Right.
So you got basketball is matching up. Sometimes you got soccer is matching up and tennis is matching up. And those are easier. But what are the numbers you're making up for when it comes to football? And so we just really try hard to focus on making sure their experiences are similar. Sometimes it makes sense to put a team of 8 or 9 on a commercial flight, right? When we were in Dallas, we had 2 airports. And so again, is it really disrupting their experience to a degree that's concerning? And that's what we really try to focus on. I look at facilities. There's some things we have to change at Auburn because our facilities are so different. And again, you get donors and others who give to a certain sport. And that means we then, as the athletics department, if we're going to accept that donation for that project, then we need to be we need to be willing to provide the resources to do that for the opposite gender. But it's not easy. It's not. But I think that you have to be committed to it and constantly working toward. It's not equitable, right? So, and again, they always say, ask the men, the gender. Well, ask the males would they want to change places with the females, and vice versa, and see what the answer is. If the men are like, yeah, we don't mind having what they have, then it's probably equitable. So. I hope that was answering your question, but
that was a good answer.
Again, it's been interesting, but I love it. But I've told my 2 last athletics directors, let a man have Title IX because it's usually us women, and so let them see what we're talking about for sure. I'm not sure they're as dialed in as we are, but most often, if you look at institutions, mostly females are overseeing Title IX
because they probably know they're gonna go hard on it. I don't know. I just think it's something about this fighting for what's right. Not to say a male counterpart couldn't do it, but we've always been the underrepresented. So you
We're gonna
always want to represent for those
Yeah.
women.
Yeah, my ethics director at SMU, Rick Hart, he said to me when I asked him that, he's like, Monique, and not to say that, like you said, the male counterparts wouldn't. He just said, I know you're going to hold us accountable to this, so I'm not worried when you have it. Okay, Rick.
That's awesome. So I like to end the show with the talk that talk questions, the triple TQs, and I typically just ask 3 questions, and you just give me your response off the top of your head. It's not hard. It's not rocket science, but I just want your true, authentic self. So,
Okay.
what advice would you give to Black women aspiring to become an athletic director or work on the collegiate level in administration?
What advice would I give to a Black woman who wants to work at this level, basically, right?
Yeah.
Um, what would I tell them? I would tell them, be thoughtful about who you work with, right? Like, yes, be more thoughtful about who you work with,
Okay.
not just so much where.
Where?
Like,
Okay.
mm-hmm.
Long term, what impact do you hope to have on student athletes by continuing to incorporate the vision of Title IX? Like, what do you hope that at the end of your journey in this position that you will gain?
What I will gain, I just hope that our student athletes will say they knew I had them. They knew I advocated for them to the very end.
Okay.
You know, I
Okay.
just I hope that that's what they can say.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the last question, what is the legacy that you want to leave for future generations?
Fallon, you say these aren't hard and they should be easy, but I think about the legacy.
That's the thing that always gets people.
I did it right, right? I want to say that I did it right. I did it the right way. I worked
Okay.
hard. Yeah, I just want to say I did it the right way and became unapologetic
Mm,
in my truth.
mm. Okay. Well, this was awesome, Monique. See, told you I wouldn't bite. That was a discussion. Get. I always like to have people on my podcast that can give an authentic, just genuine, or have a genuine conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Just to really tell, you never know what your story or who you might touch with your story. So I just think it's important just to get different people from different situations on here so that we could just have a discussion and hopefully it helps somebody moving forward who wants to be an athletic director or anything in athletics in the future. So that's what
Right.
I hope with this one.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Again, it's always great seeing you. You didn't get tripped up by little man. You want me to throw that in there?
Oh gosh, I'm gonna send little man to visit Alex in New York and Millie in California. And Tamika and Nisha. Nisha probably really needs a visit from him in Spain, right?
Yeah, that's the one I want to visit. But
Yeah.
I have to talk to her soon about what she's doing too. But
Yeah.
again, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I'm glad you could join me.
Thank you.
All right. I'll see you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Well, this was another great episode of Talk That Talk, episode 21. I had the privilege of having Monique Holland, who's the senior women's administrator at Auburn University, really working in the division of compliance, Title IX, representing different sports or overseeing different sports at that institution. But she is doing great things, especially as a Black female. So wanted to have her on this show just to give some input and just some information about what it takes to have that role, especially in a Power Five or at a Power Five school, and just her journey in general, where she's been around athletics for over 2 decades, just really doing this work. Very impressive for a young Black female. And I was happy to have her, my former coach at Georgia Tech, one of my former coaches. So thanks for being on the podcast. Well, I'm going to continue the trend and do it like I do every week and give my Black business shout out. And the Black business shout out for this week is BEZ Products LLC. This company was started by a fellow classmate of mine from high school, Kwesi Bachi. He and his son have joined forces to start this beard grooming product line, and it is impressive. For my men who are getting their James Harden on or their Ricky Rose on with the long beard gang, you got to keep that beard maintained if you want to keep entertaining these women who are looking at it, because we don't want to see a messed up beard. We want to see a male that's well groomed and keeping their beard taken care of, keeping it fresh. And this is the product line for you. The Bocce brothers have been doing business in Atlanta for years, but this brother right here has come up with a great product, a great grooming line for males. So go check him out. You can follow him on IG. It's B_EZ products. Or if you want to go to the website, it's simply bezproducts.com. And that is the Black Business shout out for the week. Please support this brother, follow him, purchase some products. And that's what you should do, because he's putting out great products and continuing to do great things in our community. So we have to support him. That's the Black Business shout out. But like every week, I enjoyed this episode 21. Monique Holland gave us some great information for you future athletic directors or future administrators. So please check out episode 21. This is another one. We are 3 episodes into season 2. Already had 2 previous good episodes with Eric Henderson on episode 19. Episode 20 was with Barry Givens. So please take a listen. Listen to season 1 as well. Support, subscribe. We need people to subscribe and listen. It's important. I love hearing feedback from my listeners and viewers. It makes me thrive. It makes me want to do better. So let's continue the trend. It was a great one. This is episode 21 in the books. See you next time.